Hi, everybody. My name is Jessie Christensen, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm a research scientist at the NASA Exoplanet Science Institute at Caltech, and I'm a planet hunter. I search for and catalog brand new worlds outside of our solar system. So tonight's panel, World Building, How Science Sculpts Science Fiction, is near and dear to my heart. On behalf of IPAC, I'm honored to welcome you all to tonight's event. IPAC is an astronomical center at Caltech, which partners with NASA, NSF, JPL, and the worldwide research community to advance the exploration of our universe. In addition to hosting the NASA Exoplanet Science Institute, where I work, we support NASA astronomy missions and host science data archives. Our diverse community of active researchers is dedicated and essential to fulfilling our mission. I'd like to thank our co-sponsor of this event, the Keck Institute for Space Studies, a Caltech campus and JPL think tank, for dreaming up new possibilities for space exploration. I'm grateful for their partnership and their belief that creativity is an essential ingredient to any new space mission or work of science fiction. For tonight's event, we have some amazing writers who have created some incredible fictional worlds. I know you'll have lots of questions for them, and I'll be looking for those questions in the Zoom Q&A feature. So please do use that when you have questions. Let's get on to the panel. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for tonight's panel, Phil Plait, also known as the Bad Astronomer. I promise he's not actually bad at astronomy. He's the author of several very good astronomy books, as well as the Bad Astronomy blog for Sci-Fi Wire. And he was the head writer for season 1 of Bill Nye Saves the World on Netflix. His main qualification for tonight, though, is that he's a huge science fiction nerd, and I know he's as excited to be here as I am. So Phil, please take it away.
Thanks, Jessie. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very pleased to be moderating this tremendous panel of amazing writers. And so thanks to IPAC and Caltech and to the Keck Institute of Space Studies for having me on. I love listening to smart people talk about topics I'm interested in. So let's introduce some of the panel, or even, all of the panel, why not? First up, we have Becky Chambers. She has a Hugo for her Wayfarer series, nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke and Locus Awards. And she has a novella coming out, and her titles are just amazing. As someone who writes a lot, I wish I could come up with titles this good. The next novella is To Be Taught If Fortunate. It's great. So thanks for coming on, Becky.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I'm excited to have you here. Our next panelist is Simon Guerrier. And let's make sure he's coming on. There he is. Now, I'm jealous of all of these folks, but he's written Doctor Who audio adventures. So, I mean, come on. He's got a sci-fi series called Graceless, and his next book coming out is The Story of the Solar System. So
Hello.
Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. This is working just astoundingly well for 2020. Next up, we have Mary Robinette Kowal. There she is. She has written the Lady Astronaut series. She's president of the Science Fiction Writers Association. 4 Hugos. 4 Hugos. I was almost nominated for a Hugo once. And this I found intriguing. You did voice for Jim Henson Pictures, or were you a puppeteer?
I'm a puppeteer.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. So welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And finally, we have John Scalzi, my old friend, which I should probably say like Kirk. Scalzi, my old friend. Actually, I think that's Connors. New York Times bestselling author, also Hugo Award winning for Old Man's War series, Red Shirts, and the Interdependency series. John, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So we have 4 amazing authors here who have written all sorts of fantastic and hopefully grounded in reality science fiction, at least in some part. And we have lots of questions, and I want to start with a short anecdote because it relates to the first question. Years ago, when people were allowed to actually be together in person, I was playing Scattergories with some friends, which is a game where you have a topic and you have to list 10 things in that topic. They have a list, and when you get one on the list, they can check it off, and you score points for every one you get correct. And unbelievably, the other team asks my team to name 10 planets. Well, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, right to Pluto. And this is back when Pluto, for better or worse, was a planet. And then I was like, well, that's 9. It's a 10th. I said Earth, right? And I don't. And then the time ran out and they said Vulcan. Yes, Vulcan. And I was very upset by not thinking of that. And so the first question here related to that is, and I'll throw this out to all of the panelists, or you know what, let's do it in order just because it's a little bit harder since we're not in person. I'll have Becky go with this first. What is your favorite planet? And it can be fictional or non-fictional.
Oh, I feel like those are two very different questions, but I'll go with fictional. Is it tacky if I choose one of my own?
Oh, and I should say, feel free, except for John, pick one of your own.
Okay.
I'm going to be picking on John a lot. We've known each other a lot.
We've already started sniping. Okay, my favorite planet that I've made up. It's actually a moon. It would be a favorite world, if we can categorize it that way. Is in To Be Fortunate. It's an icy moon around an ice giant. I'm very partial to icy moons, and this one is called Iker, and it is home to a wide variety of multicellular organisms which glow under the ice at night. And I think it would be a very nice place to hang out.
Well, that's excellent. And did you base that on any science you had heard, or is that just something?
I'm all about the icy moons in our own solar system. So I would very much love it if we went to Europa or Enceladus or one of the bunch and found some critters there.
Yeah, and Europa was just in the news for that very reason, about looking for life on the moon, and because it's glowing.
It's glowing.
Perfect.
Or it could be glowing. Could be glowing. Yes.
All right, Simon, how about you?
I'm also going to choose a moon. I'm going to choose the moon of Endor, where the wild teddy bears live in tree houses. I think that's amazing. I quite would like to live in a tree house with some teddy bears. I think that'd be quite fun. And I'm kind of, I know it's not very scientifically accurate. I don't really care. There you go.
I can't imagine anybody watching this, of the, holy macaroni, 570 people in the audience right now, would not know about Endor, but just in case.
Endor is in Star Wars Episode 3, Return of the Jedi.
And that's where the cannibalistic Ewoks live. So I don't know how much I'd want to live there. They were going to eat our friendly party. So, okay, let's go to Mary Robinette. What do you think? What do you got?
Well, first of all, does that really count as cannibalism if they're eating a different
Thank
species?
you.
I know.
Thank you, Mary
Okay.
Robinette.
So let's just be clear. I understand that you know space, but we. So the one I'm going to go with is Kaguya, which is in Dan Wells's audio Dragon Planet, and he worked with planetary people to come up with this because he wanted a planet where people could fly realistically, and so it's got a really high atmosphere, a lot of xenon in the atmosphere. So it's this very, very dense atmosphere, and they have to use breathers. But if you lose the breather, there's enough oxygen that you're okay for a little while, but your voice is incredibly low, and it's these kids. So they're these little kids wandering around this planet, and they're all talking like this anytime their breather comes off, and then laughing hysterically until they fall asleep. I mean, there is that aspect of it that's not particularly great, but being able to fly on a planet, and he's just thought through like how storms would play out and what the fauna would look like. It's really cool. I like it a lot.
That's very cool. And that's a planet, not a moon?
It is a planet, not a moon.
Okay. Yeah, because it would be possible, for example, to fly on our moon if you had sort of an Earth atmosphere and big wings. You could like flap and take off. Heinlein wrote about that, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But speaking of Heinlein, somebody who would know that better than I would is John Scalzi. So John, what do you think? And if you want, you can pick one of your own.
You know what? I don't need your pity, Phil. Actually, the exoplanet that I think is the coolest bar none, is actually a real exoplanet, and it is the first, one of the first two exoplanets that were ever discovered, which was in 1992. There were these two planets orbiting the pulsar, PSR 1257 plus 12. Now, what makes them really cool is that, one, of course, they were the first exoplanets that we definitively were able to ascertain actually existed. But what makes them so cool is that they are orbiting a pulsar, which means that either they are planets that formed after the star exploded. There's a secondary wave of planetary formation, and they were wrapped up in that, or that they are the cores of probably like gas giants. Everything else was just burned away, and you have these little cinders of planets, and they're just orbiting this pulsar that's, you know, just rotating super fast. And I remember the first time I heard about that, and both as someone who geeks out about science and someone who is a science fiction writer, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Because you try to imagine, of course, as we would do, what would life be like on a planet that orbits a pulsar? How would that function? How would it be a remnant from an earlier time? Would it have evolved, and how would it access energy, and all of these sorts of things? Science fiction is awesome, but science fact is even more awesome. And the fact that the very first planets we ever saw were orbiting a pulsar, you can't top that. You just can't.
Yeah, I'm still really interested in pulsar planets. They found a few, and I can't imagine that they existed before the star exploded, and not for the reason you think. It's not that they would just get vaporized, but it's that when the star explodes and loses all that mass, the gravity drops and the planets will move out really far, and they could be lost in that process. But it's also just as hard for me to imagine them forming afterwards. I mean, from what? And so it's one of these things where sometimes nature trumps our imagination. If it can happen, it will in a universe the size of ours. So I'm glad you brought that up, John, and also because people forget a lot that those were the first planets discovered, not the ones around normal stars, which we started finding in 1995, a few years later. But that's a perfect segue. This is great. And I will throw this out to anybody now. Let's try this and see if pandemonium ensues. But given what John just said, how do you go about creating a planet for a science fiction story? Do you come up? There are a couple of ways this could go. Did you read about a planet and thought, "Ooh, I could create something around that"? Do you start with science? Do you start with an idea? Do you start with the planet itself and see where it takes you, or the way you want the aliens to behave? Anything like that? Anybody who wants to just jump in?
I think it depends on the project, because I've gone both directions. Like I took the Launchpad Astronomy Workshop, which is specifically for writers to give them some science literacy, space literacy. And I got fascinated with ringed planets. So I started from, what would it be like to live on a ringed planet? What would, how do you mark your seasons? And like, what is it like when that shadow passes over wherever it is that you live? So I've started there, but I've also started at the other end where I'm like, this is kind of the society that I want. What do I need to support that? Becky, you do a lot more planet building than I do.
Well, see, but everything you said is spot on. It depends entirely on the story in question. For things like the moon I mentioned, Eker, that was very much born out of, I just like icy moons and I wanted one in the book. But often, a lot of my work is very character heavy. So I'm usually starting with, who are the people that are here and what do I need? And that can either be, I just need a backdrop, in which case I'm going to go with something very Earth-like. Because I don't want the sort of, big technological questions of how are they breathing, do they bounce, those sorts of things. If I just want a nice tidy backdrop, then I'll go with that. But if there's something environmental that I need, if there, some sort of environmental challenge, or if the place itself is part of the story, then I may start there. But usually I'm building the planet to suit the people on it rather than the other way around.
Yeah. For me, I spent a lot of time thinking about the exoplanets based on kind of what the exoplanets that we already know are like. In the interdependency, for example, one of the things that I had as a baseline is that habitable planets are not nearly as common as we would think. And so most of the planets in the interdependency series, or the moons on the interdependency series, are ones where people have to live underneath the ground, or they have to live in space habitats, because the planets are not designed for humans. They just happen to be located in a place for space that allows us to move from one place to the other. There's only one planet that actually works for humans. And that had served twofold. One, it kind of conforms to what we see with exoplanets right now, which is absolutely a manifestation of how we are able to detect them, less than it is about what kind of planets there actually are. But also just makes the world building kind of more interesting for me. If you are trying to build a universe in which all human habitations are actually dependent on each other, one of the things that you take away is Earth-like planets that would have all the resources that they would absolutely need.
I agree with all of that. I would just add, especially because I write in different media, because I write books and comics and audio, that when you're trying to create a planet for audio, you've got to think about what it sounds like, and you want it to sound interesting. So you're kind of trying to think what can be going on in the background that will kind of get the imagination of the listener going. And and if you're working in film and TV, there's a reason an awful lot of planets look like quarries or bits of desert just outside California. And so what can you add to those? So, Star Wars on Tatooine, they have an effect where you see two suns, which raises a whole load of sort of physics questions about that system, but is really because it's a very cheap, quick effect to do on a limited budget. So those are the kind of things that come into play, I think. And in a book, you can kind of put whatever you like, really. Whereas the practical constraints are not quite so at the front of your mind.
I think that's a really actually good point, because I don't think that people do realize, particularly with film and TV, how much of it really is constrained by, you say, like budgetary things, and whether or not you can get to it within the media zone, right? Because the moment you step outside of the media zone in California, all the costs of production go up. So these are funny things, but they are realistic issues that they have to consider.
Yeah, I noticed with Discovery that the new series of Discovery, without giving any spoilers, did some location filming in Iceland just to make their planet not look
It's okay. Everybody films in Iceland.
They sure do.
I used to work in Iceland filming.
I used to live there. So yeah, it was very funny watching Discovery and being like, oh, I know that.
Oh, listen to the Iceland braggers now. Oh, fine.
Yeah.
I live in
been,
Ohio.
John?
No,
Never been?
no, I have not. Thank you, Phil.
I haven't either, but in case you ever go, you should check Reykjavik before you Reykjavik.
Oh,
Thank you.
No,
Thank you very much.
no, Phil. Phil, no. No, Phil.
Simon, what you said, I'm going to be thinking about for a long time, that you have to think about how a planet sounds. And that is not something that I would necessarily think of. So that's really cool. And in everything that you all have said, you guys are really good at this, because it leads right into the next question, which is, so you've created a world or something, and you've got an alien species, or maybe humans who are living on these planets, and you've adapted the world to make your plot work. At what point do you say, well, science doesn't work. I need it to be this way, but the science won't work that way. But you say, you know what? The science just does. You're not going to explain it or anything. You're going to go past the science and just say, I'm not going to worry about that. Have you ever run into that sort of, I don't want to call it a limitation, but that sort of idea?
I think the thing that I always say with relationship with science, and that goes with world building as much as a literal world building as much as anything else, is you get the science that we know and that we understand as correct as you can, so that when you take that leap, because it is science fiction, they're equal weight, that people are willing to take that leap because you've treated them fairly and honestly, and you haven't just made this sort of world that just works the way that you want it to. You've set out the rules and you follow the rules, and then when you take the step off, people are inclined to build the world with you and try to imagine how the rules that you've set out then go on and work in the world that you're creating. You don't have to do that, particularly if you are doing something where it's a fantasy world where you do not have to bound it by the rules of physics and science or anything else, or at least not in the same way. But absolutely, the way to sell your speculative stuff is to get the stuff that we already know right, so that when you make that step, people are willing to take that step with you.
And I also find that when I'm working within constraints, that it winds up giving me better fiction. That when I am forcing myself to be like, okay, this is pain in the hiney, but it's going to be right. That I wind up having solutions. Like I can't cheat my way out of it, and so I don't go for the easy solution. Brandon Sanderson has Sanderson's law, and he's talking about magic, which is that basically the degree to which you have to explain your magic system is directly proportional to the role it plays in the plot. And I tend to treat science like a magic system in the way that I'm explaining it to my audience. So if I am doing something where all they need to know about physics is that if you throw a rock at someone, it's going to hit them, I don't have to do a great deal of a physics explanation. But if my plot hinges on orbital mechanics, then I do actually have to explain enough so that they understand you have to slow down to speed up to catch up with someone. And I feel that way when I'm doing world building, like the planet itself. It's if my character isn't directly interacting with it, I can kind of hand wave past it. But if they're directly interacting, or if it's a plot point, the more right I can be, the less likely I am to boot the reader out of the story by them going, that's not how that works.
I think the important thing to remember is that I like to think of science fiction as a spectrum, where you have like Guardians of the Galaxy on one end and The Martian on the other, and everything kind of falls in between in terms of realism. And you just have to decide at the outset of the project what flavor you're going for. And there is no right answer. My work, I've done a lot of different stuff. My main series tends to kind of fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, but I've done things on either side as well. And it just depends on what mood you're going for. But I think it's really important to signal that to the reader right off the bat. If you're going, bonkers cosmic fantasy, you need to make sure that it looks like that from the get-go, and that you're not, throwing in some space magic later on when they thought they were coming in for some, some really crunchy hard sci-fi, and instead you've got, space wizards or whatever. So as long as you set up the rules for both for yourself and for the reader early on, you can do whatever you want after that point.
I think there's also there's a danger of falling into this idea that because you get the science right, your story is good.
Right.
And there's a great Doctor Who example of this, which is that there's a 1973 Doctor Who story called Planet of the Daleks, which, spoilers, but is about a planet on which there are, well, I'll leave you to find out. But the feature of this planet is it has volcanoes, but the writer Terry Nation, who invented the Daleks, had experience where trying to cut footage of real volcanoes into a Doctor Who story hadn't quite worked. So they came up with a way that was a bit different, where they came up with ice volcanoes, which basically meant that you had a model of a cave filled with wallpaper paste that sort of sludged over some Dalek toys. It's very effective special effect. But there was no attempt to get the science right in this at all. So under that view, that's a bad story. And then 16 years after that was on telly, Voyager 2 spotted cryovolcanism. And we now think that there are ice volcanoes, what Terry Nation called ice canos. And because he said it before cryovolcanism, that is now the scientific term, because it's whoever comes up with it first. But because that's now a real thing, that means that Planet of the Daleks is a good story, whereas when it was broadcast, it was a bad story. And I just think that just kind of, you can get too bogged down into that kind of thing about have you got the details right.
I also think this, first of all, it's fantastic.
Yes.
I think it's also just sort of an unfair way to judge the goodness of a story, unless your point is to champion a specific scientific idea or to like really get into it. I'm thinking here of one of my favorite movies, Sunshine. It's a Danny Boyle film. The premise of why these astronauts are out there on this doomed mission is nonsense. And I tell this to everybody who I recommend this film to. It makes no sense whatsoever. But if you just do, sort of the improv thing and say yes, and you agree that this premise doesn't make sense, it is a gorgeous film that has nothing to do with that science at all. It has to do with the human psyche and the awe and terror of being a human living in an infinite cosmos. And so I think that while, yes, absolutely, when I'm engaging with science fiction, there will be things where I'm like, that doesn't work, but I do it in my own stuff as well. And ultimately what we're trying to do here is tell a good story. Like, that's your first job, is to tell a good story. And you can do that without getting everything right.
True.
Well,
Although,
I'm feeling a little attacked right now, having said that science was important to get right. But in fact, I absolutely agree with Becky Chambers here, that what you do is you go, this is how the world works. And then you have to honor how you decide that the world is going to work. For me, I do a lot of going, this is the stuff that I'm going to get right. The speed of light is always not just a good idea, it's the law. So whenever I have to get people around the universe, I have to find some way to do it without going faster than the speed of light. It's, to go back to what Mary Robinette said, it's a constraint that science gives me that allows me then to speculate about some other more interesting stuff.
well, and I think one of the things that happens is that the audience, you get a buy. You get one buy from the audience as a kind of gimme. It's like one wackadoo thing, like I should have said, when we were asking about favorite planets, I should have actually said Discworld, which is on the back of a turtle swimming through space. And what is the turtle on? It's on another turtle, which is also swimming through space. So it's just turtles all the way down. And that's a wackadoo premise. But the thing for me is, like, if whatever you do, whatever buy you do, that then it's logical causal chains from that. That's and the audience will go with you on that journey.
Yeah, you kind of have to set your tone at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So when the first Star Wars film begins with huge spaceships going overhead making noise in space, you kind of know that the scientific credibility of this thing is not where the focus is. I think where people especially get upset is if something that sets out that it's going to be scientifically credible and they've got the research right, then gets the mechanics of an airlock wrong, or messes up what a parsec is, or whatever it might be that gets people cross. I think as long as you're consistent and kind of tell people what it is straight away. There's a comedian in the UK who says that he knows that his comedy isn't for everybody, so he tries to make it clear what kind of comedy it is at the beginning, so that people can leave and not have a that sticks in my head when I'm writing opening scenes.
This is a very good point about the whole thing of when you are, trying to make it clear what kind of science you are. And this is one of the reasons why the 2009 Star Trek, which I thought was fun and entertaining and got so many things right that it needed to do right to bring Star Trek back into sort of the popular culture. But there was a 5-minute segment where Spock, a science officer, just unleashes a soliloquy of nonsense. A star exploded, threatening the entire galaxy. Immediately, my teeth just clenched up. And now, whenever it comes on, my wife, Christine, just puts that scene on pause and she's like, go check your email. Because everything he says there, everything that happens there is wrong. And it's okay if it's Star Wars because it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But Star Trek, my God.
Well,
This is something
could have been
I
a
thought.
gamma burst. Could have made it a magnetar. No, I'm not going to defend it. And anyway, red matter. So yeah.
There was a brief moment in a recent episode of Discovery that actually I loved for this. That the ship has crash landed on a planet and they're like, oh no, the ice is parasitic. They just drop the term parasitic ice. They do nothing to explain it. They don't ever, and they don't need to ever. You just understand there's parasitic ice, and as nighttime comes, it's going to eat the ship. And I loved that there was no technobabble around it. Like, I would have hated it if there was, and the fact that there wasn't meant that I was just like, hell yeah, parasitic ice. All right, you know.
I think night classes in astronomy to get better at doing the science bits in the Doctor Who stuff I write, and then Stephen Moffat in Blink has the Doctor explain his device by saying the most beautiful, concise piece of technobabble I've ever heard. And I just thought, that's amazing. And the Doctor says it goes ding when there's stuff. Oh, you could do it like that.
Oh,
And also the canonical wibbly wobbly tiny
Wibbly.
stuff. So
yeah.
if you don't need to explain it, don't explain it, I think is the summation here.
Yes.
I want to add, although I don't write science fiction, I've consulted on a few shows and movies, and story comes first. So, you know, if the science is wrong, that's okay. What I care about is if it's consistent. So, you know, the internal consistency of the science is what's important to me. And in fact, and to add one more thing, when I said I didn't want to say, is it a limitation if you have to have a science inaccuracy, Mary Robinette, when you said it actually can inspire you to think around the problem. That's exactly why I said I don't want to call it a limitation, because it's not.
So the one thing that I'm going to say is that while I also I'm completely on board with you do not have to have the science right and signaling and making these choices. There are, I think, a lot of people who are trying to write things that are presenting themselves as science and just using that as an excuse for lazy writing. Like, I don't know if anyone's watched Away, but so it's Mission to Mars, and you know, great. I am on board for Mission to Mars. That is my happy place. And there's a point when like they have to deploy 3 solar panels, only 2 of them deploy, and the ship is going to fail. I'm like, okay, first of all, if the ship's going to fail, if you can't have all 3, they would have sent 6 solar panels. But I'll let you have that. I'll let you have that. Sure, for the moment of drama, I can let you have that. And then they go out to do the repair. First of all, they untether, and I'm already like, no. And then, do you know what they fix the solar panel with? A pickaxe. Why do they have a pickaxe in space? Like, why is that the tool that you take out to fix a solar panel? Like, you don't have a spanner? You don't have, like, what are you doing? And so, like, I'll give you one. I'll grumble about the second, but you get 3 or 4 of those suckers deep, and I'm gonna come through the screen and stab you with my fountain pen.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. Not only that, but to go back to something that Phil said about being an advisor for science and so on and so forth. Yes, the story always has to come first, but also speaking as someone who served as a consultant for Stargate Universe, one of the things that I always said to them is, yes, obviously story comes first, but you can still get things as right as you can. Yes. and go from there. One of the things that I'm most proud of as Stargate Universe is there's ship. recharges by basically dipping into a star, which fine, whatever you're going to do. But the way that they originally had it done was that they were going to go, they're going to do a sort of slingshot thing around a planet in the Goldilocks zone around a yellow star. And I was like, okay, one thing, if you're going that fast, it's not going to slingshot. It's just going to go straight on. And also the distance between the Goldilocks zone is so far away. Why don't you just make it a red dwarf star? The planet's really super close, and then you can do everything you want. And this got me a phone call from the producers, like, do we really have to move the entire planet? And it's like, yes, you do. Yes, you do, because it's not going to take any away from the story. It's going to let you do what it is you want to do. It is scientifically accurate. And all the nerds who are like me is like, well, it's actually, that's a G2 star. The distance is just way too much. It's not going to be something that they're going to be able to do. Nobody knows, except now that I've told, that star, that red dwarf star, was my star. But now they do, because we got it right and it worked better for the story.
That's amazing, first of all, that they listened to you, because I don't think that's ever happened to me when I wanted to change something and said, well, I'll add that. I love Stargate Universe, and I saw that scene, and when the whole thing played out, I was like, yes, excellent. And for Mary Robinette, I did watch that show, and I got as far as you did, almost, because I never saw the pickaxe. I said exactly, my wife and I were watching, I said exactly the same thing about no redundancy in the panels. I said the same thing about going out there to fix it, and they untethered. And I was like, no. And then when he threw her, one astronaut takes another one and throws her to get her to where she needs to go.
We're way deep in spoiler territory here, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's why I never saw the pickaxe scene, because click.
Yep.
Not that I want to
later they have to drill a hole, and they drill through the ship. I'm like, do you know how thick the walls of ships are? You do. It's like, whoops.
Okay.
And they have everyone in the room that they're planning on drilling through. And I'm like, if you're concerned that I was very stabby. I watched the whole thing. Like, they got the emotion. This was the thing, is like, they got the human emotions so right, and the science was so bad that I just had to pretend that they were talking about making popcorn with a Nike shoe, because it made that much sense.
Well, if you hit the kernel hard enough and compress it, it'll heat up. Okay. A lot of people actually in the audience are asking this question. This is a really good question. I wouldn't have thought of this. It's a variation on where do you get your ideas, but specifically, where do you get your science ideas? Do you read science books? Do you read magazines? Do you read like blogs about science and astronomy and planets? Just curious. Hey, Becky, how about you?
Oh, I read everything. I read science news. I love to read nonfiction. I actually, like, this is a terrible thing to admit, but I spend a lot more time reading nonfiction than I do fiction these days. Because it's not what I spend my day writing, so it's a nice break. But it's wonderful fuel to read real science and to read about the real research that's happening from the people who are doing it. That's probably my biggest source of inspiration. And I watch a lot of PBS. I do. I just sort of try to stay open to everything. I wouldn't call myself an expert in any one field, but I like to pick up little pieces of things everywhere I go.
Yeah, I also read a ton of nonfiction. I do read your blog, Phil.
Thank you. Click on the ads.
Yeah, I read. Hi, this is Elsie. If you would like to know what I've done with my pandemic, I have trained my cat to stand on my shoulder, which sometimes backfires. I'm doing panel. But the other things that I cultivate friendships as much as I can. Like, anytime I meet someone on a panel, anytime I see someone on Twitter who's super smart about a topic, I make a note. I try not to exploit them just for their science, but I have found great joy in talking to scientists. One of the things that a friend told me is that, let me back that sentence up and say it the way that's way more fun. One of the
Here it
things that,
comes.
no, one of my astronaut friends.
There we go. There we are.
Ah,
That's
okay.
what I was waiting for.
I know, I will never get tired of that sentence. But what he said was, it's like everyone that he works with is an astronaut, so they don't want to talk work. And when he's talking to people who are not astronauts, they ask the same set of questions. But when he's talking to a writer, he gets to talk about all of the things that he loves about his job that have become run of the mill, and it helps him rediscover some of the joy. And I'm like, did you just say rediscover some of the joy of being an astronaut? Because I may have to
Stab you with a pickaxe.
stab you with a pickaxe, because that's standard issue.
Well, so is a machine gun apparently in Armageddon. So what are you gonna do?
Right. You know,
Simon, how about you?
Okay. So
Oh, wait.
fair thing. One of the things that they do actually have in the, I believe in the Soyuz, is a shotgun as part of the survival kit. So fair game. It's in case you come down where there are bears.
On the moon.
Landing back on Earth, I think.
Yeah.
Simon, how about you? Do you read?
Yeah. I read everything and anything, and I'm a magpie for. And I have the great joy of doing Doctor Who, where you can, if you find out something interesting about history or a bit about the architecture of London or anything like that, you can spin a story out of that. So I'm always on the lookout for stuff. Similarly, I'm very interested in people that do interesting things. And I'm a proper old nerd. So what counts as interesting things is I have a very broad range of that. And I tend to ask people, if it's a job that I don't really know about, what people get wrong about their job. That's always a good question. You often get good things about that. But then, you know, I wrote a space station, a Blake 7 story for the radio a few years ago, based solely on going to see Pirates of the Caribbean, and thinking Keith Richards in it doing cameos in movies. What kind of cameos would you know, like other pop stars? What would Keith Moon have been like if he'd, you know, lived to 70 and done cameos in Hollywood movies? He'd be the same kind of space rogue, but he'd just be a bit more bisexual and a bit more fey about it. And that whole story just came out of that idea. And you know, why aren't there cushions on spaceships? Why is it all bare metal? And wouldn't it be nicer if he had a bit of chintz?
We have a question from the audience here, and I love this because this has occurred to me as well, especially on Star Trek. It's from Teresa Snyder, and it is, planets in movies are always depicted as if they have only one ecology: desert planet, jungle planet. You know, the ice moon Hoth, the jungle moon Endor in Star Wars. How do you create a world that feels full and rich? And what terrestrial environment would you choose to represent Earth if it were to be a fictional locale? I love this idea.
I love I see it as a complaint of, unless it's an ice world, which makes sense to me because it's ice. But anything else, you have these various terrestrial zones. And if you don't, then you have to really explain it. I mean, one of the things that Herbert did is there's a reason why it's all a desert planet, and it has to do with the worms. Likewise, Cherry Tepper, when she did grass, there was a reason to have it as a planet that was completely full of grass. You can get away with a mono environment, but again, you have to explain it and you have to have it make sense. Unless it's your gimme and you're just like, okay, it's the planet of Jello. Everything's made out of gelatin. Why? Because it's the gelatin planet, and that's the way it is. But when I design planets, I keep the idea of, well, if there are going to be living things in there, there are going to be different zones. There's going to be warmer zones, there's going to be temperate zones, there's going to be weather, and the weather is going to have an effect. If there are mountains, then one side of the mountains is going to be drier than the other side of the mountains. And you have to be thinking about that. You have to be, and again, it really depends on how much you want to actually do the work and how important it is. If you're not doing any other work, like when I did Old Man's War, the whole planet Earth was represented by literally where I live in Ohio, because I was only going to be there for a chapter and a half. So it was, hi, welcome to temporal rural Ohio. You're here for 50 pages. Now we're leaving, bye. But if you're doing the real world building, I tend to make the worlds actually look more like the one world we know that humans live on, and all those different temperate zones.
Yeah, in TV and film, you don't often have a lot of time. So you're trying to paint in broad brushstrokes anyway, and you just want to establish a feel for where you are quickly. An example of that is the very first Dalek story on TV takes place on the Daleks' home planet, which has been scarred by a nuclear war. And it's just called Skaro, and it's got a petrified jungle and stuff. Once the Daleks were a big hit, they started doing annuals and comic strips and stuff, and they could really go to town on exploring the planet. And it had, seas of acid, and it had, all sorts of planetary features that they could get into. But in the first story, they just didn't have, even though they explored the planet a bit, there just wasn't space to do it. So it's all time-consuming stuff. This thing about it's all explanation, really. It's all exposition. So you generally try and dodge the exposition as best you can, and don't do a lecture on the 1984 by George Orwell has a bit where they stop and he reads from a book he's made up to tell you how clever he's been in constructing his world. It's frowned upon, Yeah,
I mean, I would say it's actually, in some ways, obviously they're very different media, but like it's not dissimilar in writing a novel, in that unless you are staying on one planet for your entire story, there is no reason why your character is going to say, well, we're in the desert now, which is different from the Mediterranean climate over there. And just so you're all aware, we do have ice caps. Like, nobody's going to sit there and just tell you about all the different climates that are on the planet. They're just going to talk about where they are. So I do think of this in my work. I try very hard to make it clear when we're in, say, Resket, which is a capital city in my Wayfarer series, that I'm very clear about, this is the environment here, this spot on this continent, this is what this looks like. And there are references here and there to, other places people go in this world. But I'm not going to sit and like map out the whole planet for you, because it's not necessary, and because it would end up being like, a book yay thick, and nobody has time for that, especially not me.
This is killing me. I'm reading the questions from the audience, and they are all so good. And twisting sort of notions that I've had for a long time and putting a different spin on them. It's killing me that we have 7 minutes left. So I think we have time for 2 questions. So I want to ask, and I like this idea a lot. Do you think it's harder to invent new worlds now that we've actually found a bunch? 4,000 and counting outside of our solar system. Do you think it's harder to invent new worlds now that we've actually found them? Much harder than it would have been, say, 25 years ago, before we started piling on the exoplanet discoveries?
No, I think it's easier. I mean, the one thing that has changed is we can't pretend that Mars has canals or that Venus is swampy, right? But we have, I mean, the exoplanets that we've seen such a wide range of types of planets. We've seen hot Jupiters. We've seen planets where the sky is filled with sparkles because it's raining metal. All of these sorts of really cool things that, again, would sound fantastical if they were in science fiction, but have science backing them up because of where they are around their stars and so on and so forth. What we have done is that we have shown that, quite frankly, there's almost nothing that we can create that science hasn't already said, hold my beer to.
Right.
I think you can see that visually in what I was saying about filming in Iceland. It's not enough anymore to film in a quarry or a bit of desert and say this is an alien planet. People expect more and that's partly driven by how weird a lot of these things are and how counterintuitive and strange they are. And you've got to show that richness. I mean, people kind of demand it now.
I also want to echo back to what Mary Robinette said earlier, in that constraints often can make you more creative. Knowing here's what the limitations are here, instead of having just a completely blank slate, you have things you can start from, which is infinitely easier because you don't have to make it all up. You're not starting from scratch. You have all these wonderful templates now.
Yeah, it's actually the place that it's harder, I would say, to write science fiction is stuff that is within our own solar system, because the universe is big enough that you can extrapolate an exoplanet, and as long as you are not specific about which specific star you're putting it around, you're fine. Anything that is happening in our solar system, the number of changes that we like, the new things that we learn every day, it's like, oh, well, just go revise that book very quietly.
In some of the consulting work that I've done, this is a sort of a sideways take on it, but they will typically in their plot want to go from point A to point B, and they'll say, we just want to do it this way. And I'll say, well, actually the science would have this happen. And then that would give them more ideas about subplots or other things they can do. So instead of limiting it, it actually it expands what they can think of and what they can do. And I love that about this. And now we have time for one more question. Yeah, I like this question. It's different than the one I was going to ask. So it's from the audience. Can you talk about the value that science fiction has for advancing science? I mean, you use science to get your science fiction, and it goes the other way. How can science fiction help science?
So our job, our job is basically to ask the what if questions, and to ask them on a different kind of theoretical scale. Like, you all are also asking the what if questions. But the thing that we can do is ask these what if questions and then attach it to the way it affects people. And that is a thing that I think that we can do that is invaluable. The thought experiments that go with each piece of technology or each scientific discovery of how does that tie back into to what it means to be a person. We can model for you. I was part of a think tank, which most of the people were not science fiction writers, and someone was saying, as we don't know what, like, imagine if we were going to try to go to another planet that was 100 light years away. Like, no one has thought about how we do that. And I'm like, I can give you a reading list. I mean, it's called a generation ship. We've done that. So that's one thing that I think where we have, and the other thing, when someone else will probably jump in, is we build you new scientists.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that is the example that I love to give is the flip phone. The flip phone exists because Star Trek had the communicator and people talked into it, and all these engineer nerds wanted their own communicator. We landed here outside of Los Angeles, that sort of thing. We feed on each other. We posit, scientists go, well, now let's think about that. They create they look and find answers. We build from that. It's a continual Hegelian process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, over and over and over again.
Yeah, like the Albuquerque drive. I'm not saying that correct.
Yeah, Albuquerque, the warp bubbles.
Yeah,
absolutely.
the warp bubble.
Yeah.
So I did a documentary about H.G. Wells, and H.G. Wells read a fairly obscure paper about splitting the atom when that was very theoretical. And he wrote a book in 1916 called The World Set Free, where they had atomic bombs. He's a name he coined, which was as he understood it, was a grenade, and a guy takes his hands off the biplane he's flying to pull out the pin of this grenade and throw it, and this grenade just keeps exploding. And that was how he understood what the consequences of that science would be. But about just over 10 years later, Leo Szilard, walking through London, suddenly went, oh, I know what the chain reaction would be. It wouldn't be like that. It would be like, and in that moment of mental flip of A, going, this is how that wrong science would work, and B, this is what the consequences would be for a built-up area. He kind of made the connection that was vital to the development of the real atomic bomb. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, is another question. But yes, I love the idea that the atomic bomb are correct, because he was attempting to fix the bad science in a science fiction story.
Look, the number of novels and short stories that have been written because one of us was trying to fix something that was terrible.
Red shirts.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'll give you a chance to plug your stuff, John. Just hang on a second. And Mary Robinette, just to be as obvious as I can about what you said, science fiction does inspire scientists. Back in the day, the actors who were playing in science fiction movies and TV shows weren't necessarily inspired by the science fiction, but then the actors who came later, Will Wheaton talks about this as well from Star Trek, that inspired them. And whenever I've interacted with science fiction actors and writers, that inspired me when I was a kid, the science and the science fiction. And so there's a generation of scientists who grew up watching Star Trek. So that is a direct and causal relationship. Sadly, got to wrap it up here. But the good news is you all get about a minute to, well, actually less than that if you can, plug whatever it is you're working on right now or something you want to promote. Feel free, and we can go in alphabetical order again. We can start with Becky.
I have 2 books coming out next year, the first of which is the last novel in the Wayfarers series. It's entitled The Galaxy and the Ground Within. It'll be out in February. And then I have a novella in a brand new setting called A Psalm for the Wild Built. That'll be out in July. You can find pre-order links for both of those on my website, otherscribbles.com, which is the only place on the internet you can find me.
You're writing all of the titles for everything I write from now on. Amazing. So cool. Such a way with words. It's amazing. Simon, go ahead.
Out today or yesterday, if you're in the UK like I am, is Doctor Who Wicked Sisters, a bigfinish.com audio adventure which has Sontarans on the moon.
Oh, cool. Mary Robinette.
So I have 2 things next year. One is a novel called The Spare Man, which is a standalone murder mystery on an interplanetary cruise ship going between the Earth and Mars. There are no pickaxes. And I worked with an actual rocket engineer to design the ship. So novel. But then the one that's, I think, more appropriate for this particular conference is in January. I have a short story called Still as Bright, which is set in my Lady Astronaut universe. It'll be uncanny, and it is about the search for exoplanets, but using the technology that was available in the 1960s.
Cool. And they could use a pickaxe on Mars. There's
Yeah, when you get there. Yes, but why isn't?
Keep it locked away. All right, John, go ahead. What are you working on now?
I'd like to announce that my next novel will be called The Martian Pickaxe. I'm very excited about it. It's been in process for a while. I haven't wanted to talk about it, but clearly it's been spoiled by all of this sort of stuff. We will delve into the reasons why one would take a pickaxe not only to Mars, but would use it as an instrumental piece of equipment.
John, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
It's a sonic pickaxe. That was what I missed.
That's exactly right.
Do you have anything you're actually working on?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Well, you can find what I write on sci-fi-wire.com, Bad Astronomy, and on Twitter, Bad Astronomer. You can find most of us on Twitter. Just look up the names here. This has been, I say this after every panel, but I'll say it sincerely this time. This has been amazing listening to you all talk about this sort of thing, because this isn't exactly my field. Usually when I'm moderating a panel, it's with astronomers or things like that. So this is really fascinating to see how you work with these premises. Now I'm gonna write science fiction myself and win all these great Locus and Hugos, instead of just almost being nominated for Hugo. Came very close. And I'd also like to thank the Keck Institute for Space Studies, Caltech, and all the wonderful people who sponsored this, the audience who is here, and of course, Jessie Christensen, Dr. Christensen, who invited me on. So Jessie, where are you? Come on up.
Thanks so much, Phil. Wow, that was so much fun. Thank you to Phil, our moderator, to Becky, Simon, Mary, Robinette, and John for sharing your thoughts with us on how science and science fiction inform each other. It's gone so well. I'm so excited. Thanks to our hosts, IPAC and the Keck Institute for Space Studies. And most of all, thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us tonight and for asking such awesome questions. There were so many more than we could get through, unfortunately. I tried to copy them all over to the Q&A, so hopefully you can all see them. We got a good chat going in the Q&A by the end. Thank you again, everyone. Stay safe wherever you are and have a good rest of your night.